Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabe from the Cartridge team. It's great to be here. Thank you for ZeroXSpark and Lattice teams for having me, for hosting. Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about emergence. What is emergence? What is its utility? Why is it significant? We'll start with the abstract. So emergence is defined as the process of coming into being. It sounds poetic. But for the purposes of having a productive conversation, let's extend that definition. Emergence as the process of coming into being within a set of constraints. And in this context, those constraints are the technological and practical constraints that inform how a player or a contributor can modify a game world or one of these game ecosystems. And over the last couple decades, we've seen this emergent force create tremendous value in a number of these different games. So to start, I'd like to kind of look at one of the examples of these ecosystems. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell the story of how Warcraft III didn't become League of Legends or Dota 2. I think that everybody in the room has probably heard that story. But I think that by examining what the constraints were in the Warcraft III world editor, I think that we can inform a framework for assessing how modding and emergence can create value in fully on-chain games. So if you haven't seen it before, this is what the UI for the Warcraft 3 world editor looked like. And back in the early 2000s, this was tremendously powerful. It allowed people to create custom terrains, to place trees and buildings and units. It allowed you to customize the attributes of those units. And it even came with a scripting language that allowed you to create triggers and create more kind of complex gameplay mechanics. So this is the set of constraints that the emergent force propagated through and created all kinds of exciting custom games. And so I'll indulge myself in kind of putting some of my favorite Warcraft 3 games up here. Hopefully these are familiar to some of you guys. We have some of the like Lord of the Rings scenario games at the bottom, Castle Defense in the top middle. That was a favorite of mine. Top left is Winter Mall. This is one of my favorite tower defense games. But you can see some kind of common threads through all of these games. They all take place on kind of a 2D plane. And so you can start to get an idea of what some of the constraints within which the community that was building mods in the Warcraft 3 ecosystem was kind of operating within. So, this was I distinctly remember being flamed for joining a Wintermall game and not already knowing that you were supposed to create a hook in the corners so the mods would kind of just infinitely spin. But in any case, that's just some fun. So let's look at some affordances and challenges that were created by the constraints of the Warcraft 3 custom editor. So the first thing that you got was this robust world editor. It allowed you to create all of these cool custom games. And it also gave a hosting service so that you could easily, kind of spin up these games online and people could join your lobbies. But it also came with all these challenges. And these things have been discussed endlessly, probably by many of the people in this room. There was a walled garden, right? So Blizzard really controlled what was possible within this world. There was no persistent state, which was cool because in this case, we got this like session-based gameplay, which was a lot of fun. There is this deep incentive misalignment, and this is something also that's been discussed, right? The Blizzard devs versus the people that were creating these custom games versus the players. And we also suffered from this lack of like a network effect. All the time that was spent, the value wasn't really being captured anywhere. And so we all kind of know like how this story ends. Blizzard kind of fumbled the bag on, owning the MOBA space. And this guy would become like the Michael Jordan of video games. But really the kind of question is like, how do we use this information to create a framework for starting to think about modding within a fully on-chain game world? So this was really my introduction to the idea of fully on-chain games. And this diagram was actually taken from a presentation that I saw Terrence from our team give probably about a year and a half ago. And the idea was fairly straightforward. This is going to be probably familiar to everyone in this room. But the idea is that what we now refer to as Web 2.5 games, where you put the primitives on chain and everything else lives off chain, was kind of an interesting step forward, but it left a lot to be desired. And so by continuing to put things on chain, eventually you arrive at what we now describe as a fully on-chain game, right? So it's not just like the sword, but the sword has attributes like attack damage and attack speed, the behaviors like the combat resolution for how you use that sword, and then ultimately the governance that informs how these other three layers evolve over time is all put fully on-chain. And the question becomes, now that we have kind of this fully on-chain game ecosystem, what does it do to kind of modding, right? So this is where we're going to really kind of go off the deep end here. So follow me here. We're going to establish this framework for thinking about modding and what's really possible when you put games fully on-chain. So this is kind of a continuum of the granularity with which you can mod a game world. And we're going to start at the top, right? So the first thing, little font issue here, but the first thing is cosmetic, right? So this is, buying skins in League of Legends. It's something that's kind of fun for the player, but it doesn't fundamentally impact the gameplay or the way that you play these games. This might strike people initially as like inconsequential, but Riot Games built like a unicorn business off of it. So take with that what you will. I play Ashe. I actually have been using that purple skin in the top right a lot recently. Continuing down this spectrum, the next thing is configuration. So this is a screenshot from Super Smash Bros. I know Sylva's in the back here. And it's really the choice that you're making between playing for time or playing for stock. And so you see this is a simple choice, but it starts to get into the realm of impacting the way that people are playing these games. And if we continue down the spectrum, the next thing is customization. So this is what we just discussed with the Warcraft III world editor example. Now, going deeper than this is where we start to get into the realm of what a fully on-chain game enables. And I know that this continuum is not perfect. The kind of layers between each are probably gray in different contexts. But the next thing starts to get into the realm of digital physics. Now, this is a little muddy because I know that the definition of an autonomous world for a lot of people involves immutable digital physics. But I think that the Dark Forest example of players creating their own clients, which enabled them to kind of mine at different rates, is a great example of a change to the client that allowed players to kind of interact with those digital physics in a different manner, right? So this is starting to really fundamentally change the world for people. And if you go to the bottom of this granularity spectrum, so far as I can surmise, the best example is kind of the original intention of the Loop project, right? So the idea being that you put these primitives out into the world for anyone to come along and build new experiences for them. And so in this example, you might have a sword, and you can use that sword in a hack and slash game. You can use it in a card game, and all these different experiences might have fundamentally different digital physics. So, so really, what does this mean? One thing that I'd like to kind of point out is that you can set the constraints for that emergent force at kind of different levels within this granularity spectrum. So in the Warcraft III example, the constraints exist at the customization level. And so you can kind of imagine that the design space for what was possible in the Warcraft III ecosystem is everything above that customization level. And as you start to kind of reduce the level of granularity of those constraints, you increase the design space. So in this kind of like loot example, the design space is basically anything that you can imagine building that uses those primitives. So let's keep going here by re-examining how the affordance and challenges of the modding ecosystem changes as you kind of go down that spectrum of granularity. So the first thing that happens is that you're likely going to lose the robust world editor. If you're dealing with primitives, it's going to be difficult to build a world editor that's going to be effective for all these different types of experiences. The second thing that happens is, these are a little bit out of order. The second thing, so you ditch the world editor, but you do get the expanded design space. The next thing that happens is we ditch the walled garden, which is a big win as game worlds become client agnostic. The next thing that happens is we get the persistent state, we get incentive alignment, and we get the network effects. And again, these bullet points are tremendously important. They're things that we've talked a lot about in this community. But the last thing that happens is as you go deeper on this granularity spectrum, the technical requirements become more challenging. It becomes harder to build these games from a technical perspective, but it also becomes more difficult to think about sustainable systems for having, maintaining kind of healthy modding communities as these worlds start to really expand. So what does this mean? How much time do I have? What's 3 minutes? Okay, great. So really what I want to do now is take a look at one of the examples that I'm familiar with. I'm not part of the Core Realms team, but I've had the opportunity in hosting some of these game jams to work closely with some of these teams here. And so really what I want to highlight is the vision for the first kind of iteration of the Realms world, which is to create an eternal game, an expanding self-sufficient open gaming protocol. So the reason this is important is because it pretty closely aligns with the lowest level of this granularity spectrum. And so the first game that the Realms team endeavored to build was called Eternum. It's a strategy game where you have a realm. The realm has some enshrined elements like a location, some set of resources, and really the idea is to harvest those resources and build up an army and raid other realms and so on and so forth. But the interesting thing about this game is that in order to harvest these resources, you have to depend upon the labor within your realm. And so one of the mods that came out of the last game jam is called GM Lord. And the concept is really simple, to introduce this AI element to the villagers that exist within your realm. The reason why this is interesting is because you can start to get a sense for if the villagers in your realm have a mood, if they have a political affiliation, if they're able to form opinions about the way that you govern your own realm, you can start to see that maybe they don't like the decisions that you're making. And so you end up in a scenario where this guy, to go back to the Warcraft III situation, is forming an opinion on the decisions that you're making, and maybe that they don't want to work hard. They don't want to harvest these resources. And so interestingly, this mod kind of achieves a similar thing that we saw happen with the Dark Forest. Though in the Dark Forest example, we changed the way that the digital physics manifested in the world by editing the client. In this example, we're changing the way that the digital physics are manifesting by making a fundamental change to the world contract. This mod is, I think, the idea is to ultimately propose a change to the world contract that the DAO will vote on to incorporate. Really quickly, I want to just look at two more examples. The next game that the Realms team has built was Loot Survivor. And the primitive behind this is an adventurer that has an enshrined health, stamina, location, so very kind of like classic RPG style game. And one of the other mods that came out of the game jam was Loot Underworld. So the idea is that Underworld is an entire underground ecosystem that exists under each realm. And you can take your adventurer, go into this underworld, fight monsters and, perhaps attain some awards that you can bring back to your realm. But the cool thing about this is that the underworld extended the realms. They didn't need permission from the world contract. And so now we have three different types of mods. We have the Dark Forest example where people are editing the client. We have the GM Lord example where people are proposing modifications to the world contract itself. And we have the Underdark example here where people are extending the world contract permissionlessly. I was going to go into a fourth example, but I think I'm out of time here. So really the question that I want to leave you all with is, what types of mods will your autonomous world enable? What level of granularity will those mods be able to take place? And what types of permission controls and governance will you put in place to kind of create healthy modding ecosystems? Thank you.